Baker Botts LLP provides podcasts for educational purposes only. They are not legal advice. This communication may constitute attorney advertising.
Welcome to the Environmental Evolutions Podcast, where we explore the changing landscape of environmental law and policy. I'm your host, Megan Burge, coming to you, as always, from my closet in Joshua Tree, California. In today's episode, we are going to discuss current events related to the intersection between climate concerns and companies' Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, obligations. Joining me today is our own Bridget Moore. Bridget is the firm-wide co-chair of our litigation department and specializes in SEC enforcement, defense, and compliance. Thank you for joining me today, Bridget.
Thanks for having me.
Bridget, it just occurred to me that your practice may be one of the only ones where people are less excited to need to call you, but I'm going to leave that aside for a moment. Yeah, exactly. My jealousy of the corporate department continues to this day and all their happy good news deals, but we should probably get started. And I thought we might start with the recent events that spurred my relentless campaign to recruit you for this episode, which was President Biden's executive order on climate-related financial risks. And just for level set for folks, President Biden signed the EO on May 20th to, and this is a quote, advance consistent, clear, intelligible, comparable, and accurate disclosures of climate-related financial risk, end quote. The order reflects the administration's whole of government approach and directs numerous agencies to take actions. And we're talking everyone from the Secretary of the Agriculture to the Treasury Secretary and the Secretary of Labor. But all of the directions share a common thread: the integration and increased transparency of climate-related risks in financial disclosures, which brings us to why I invited Bridget to join us today. All right, Bridget. So with that level set, where should we start?
Let's start by discussing the executive order just a little bit more in a little bit more detail, because I think it really is this administration's call to action. It's a reset, and it really calls upon every part of the government to take a step back and look at how to evaluate climate-related financial risk. So it's really the beginning of what this administration is going to focus on, and it's such a big undertaking. A little bit of you got to start somewhere.
I am going to pause you there just for 1 second, because it sounds like what you're saying is this is really the start of the process to set the table for actions that will come over the next couple of years.
That's absolutely right, and it's interesting because just reading the executive order, it's kind of like, where do you even start? So it's really kind of very broad, right? So it's the government themselves has to look at what they're doing, and then it also has to look at what they're doing externally in terms of the services it provides its citizens.
Well, with that, Bridget, I want to transition over to what I would call your house, which is the SEC. What does this mean for the SEC?
Well, this is it's interesting. So the SEC has been making headlines in this space prior to the executive order coming out. And in fact, Allison Lee, who was the SEC acting chair before Gensler was confirmed, really, in the early part of 2021, really started getting out there and putting forth the SEC's path, essentially, towards a more focused ESG initiative. It's very timely. Social justice issues are at the forefront of the boardrooms. Shareholders are demanding that companies report on issues like climate change, diversity, income equality. And, I think that Allison Lee herself would say that the SEC was slow to confront climate change, but I think that there is a lot of runway in terms of what the SEC can do to provide guidance to the companies that are required to report. pursuant to their rules and regulations, to provide the investing public with what they're looking for in terms of climate change disclosures and other ESG related issues.
I have to stop you there. When you say Gensler, who is Gensler?
Sorry, this is my world, so I just assume everybody knows who Gensler is.
Yeah,
Gensler
he's the
is
Madonna of the SEC world, apparently.
Oh yes, exactly. Gary Gensler, he's the newly appointed chair of the SEC.
Well, I actually want to back up a step to something you just said, which is that they were really laying out what a focused path looks like on ESG. What is a focused path for the SEC on ESG?
So in my opinion, a more focused path would be actual guidance around what is required to be disclosed. The Division of Corporate Finance had put out some guidance in 2010, guidance with respect to climate change and what is required to be disclosed under regulation, what's called Regulation SK. And it was kind of too general for what we're seeing today, right? It was kind of legal proceedings and things like that. Certainly is not satisfying Commissioner Lee. So and investors too, some investors. So I think a path would include something that companies can look to as what is actually required versus what's out there now. So I'm hoping that path gets us some clear insight into to the exact disclosure requirements. Now that's not going to be easy, but I think at this point, it's a situation where it's just such a hot button issue. Our clients are wanting to do the right thing, and we just need a little help in terms of of what does that mean? What does that look like?
Well, let's get back to the EO. What divisions within the SEC are going to be impacted by the administration's action?
Starting with the whole premise of the discussion today, which is disclosure, which puts us into the Division of Corporate Finance, which is responsible for disclosures, and they review disclosures and all of that. So getting back again to kind of what in the early part of the year, what Acting Chair Lee put into place this request for public input with respect to the Commission's disclosure rules and guidance as they apply to climate change disclosures, including whether the guidance should be modified. Again, there's this 2010 guidance, to the extent that your listeners want to look it up. Quick Google search. How it should be modified.
No, Bridget, I'm going to put it in the episode notes. No need for Googling.
Okay, there you go. Okay, good. So I should have known you had that covered. So, and how it should be modified, and just how best the Commission can regulate climate change disclosures. They're getting some decent input. When at the beginning of it, it was the comments were slow to come in, but certainly they're coming in fast and furious now. And so that is to the extent that a rule or regulation is going to be modified or even guidance. The SEC will put out requests for public comment, and people usually take them up on it, and they're doing that here too. And then from that, we'll see if the guidance is modified, which I'm confident that it will be. And we'll see within the Regulation SK and the disclosures that are required, what specific line items might be required. And again, it's going to be very interesting to see because of how do you measure success in this area. But certainly the Division of Corporate Finance will take the laboring oar on that.
All right, so we covered corporate finance. Are there any other divisions we should talk about?
Absolutely. We should talk about the Division of Enforcement. And the Division of
I'm
Enforcement.
shocked, Bridget, shocked that we're talking about enforcement.
People, the division that strikes fear in many people's hearts, they too will be looking at ESG and disclosures. I have to say that it's going to be interesting to see what enforcement might look like, if any enforcement, with respect to disclosures, prior to more guidance in this area. I think that you'd have to have something pretty egregious, a company that's just making, maybe representations that are, material and just absolutely false potentially in this area. But, that would be an outlier. To the extent that you have a company that is, disclosing, doing the best they can under the guidance that's out there right now, I'm hard pressed to think that enforcement is going to start picking at that again until there's more guidance out there. The then acting chair Lee, and I should add that Gensler, all signs point to the fact that he too is interested in this area and is not going to undo all the work that she did. When she was coming out with the initiatives in this area, certainly the Division of Enforcement was part of it, and there was comments that there will be some review of disclosures that are out there right now. But again, it's going to be interesting to see if there's just kind of a pause there until there's some more guidance to actually compare the disclosures again.
So, Bridget, it sounds like, if I'm hearing you right, that really enforcement's not going to be front and center per se this year, but that the regulations and the rulemakings you talked about at the start of the podcast are going to be game changers, and that companies really need to be paying close attention when those come out to ensure that they don't run into enforcement issues.
That's exactly right. I think that right now, what the stated, what enforcement is responsible for is they're supposed to develop initiatives to proactively identify ESG related misconduct, and to mine and assess information across registrants to identify potential violations. So I have no doubt they're attempting to do that. But to your point, Megan, I think that this idea that they're going to identify quote unquote material gaps or misstatements in disclosures, it's going to be, unless they are, it's kind of an outlier, right? I mean, we're sitting here talking about companies that are, looking to disclose this type of information. You're right. I mean, I think that they're going to have to actually have something to, to look at the disclosures that are out there against the guidance that is given by the SEC to determine if there are these gaps. So you're exactly right. I think that it'll be a while before we see that with respect to disclosures.
Well, let's take a little bit of a deeper dive here, because not all companies are the same, right? Are investment companies and infrastructure companies, just an example, similarly situated here?
No, it's a great question, Megan. No is the answer. And an area where enforcement can actually make its mark, if you will, earlier rather than later, is in those entities that are subject to OC, the Office of Compliance Inspection Examinations within the SEC. Part of their priorities this year are to look at disclosures around ESG investing. As I'm sure you can imagine, there is a significant number of individuals who are interested in investing in products that have some level of ESG involvement. And so there is an area where, to the extent that a group is marketing a product related to ESG investing, and that product doesn't meet meet exactly how it's marketed. It's not ESG at all. I'm sure it'll run the whole spectrum. that I think, is where you could see immediate enforcement in that area, because that is just a plain and simple. You say it's this, but it's not, and that is kind of the bread and butter of enforcement.
As we're getting close to the end of our time here today, but before I let you go, what should companies be watching for as the EO is implemented, or acting chairman's lead, that pathway is carved out? What should they be watching for?
Yeah, they should be watching for what their peers are doing. They should be watching for the comment letters that are coming in. They're always kind of interesting to read, and could provide insight into what people really want to see. The SEC has been really good about getting out their position quickly on these types of disclosures. There's actually a page, a resource page on the SEC's website specifically devoted to this topic. And so I think that the information from the SEC will be coming, I think by all accounts, quickly. And so I think people need to keep an eye on that, and certainly kind of keeping an eye on, or an ear to the ground with respect to what their shareholders are interested in understanding, what they're interested in the company speaking to. That goes beyond disclosures, technical disclosures, right? In your 10Ks and your 10Qs, and but what they want the company to take a position on. And just keeping your eye on all those types of things, I think will be helpful as we get through this uncertain time, particularly with respect to our regulators, and what is required to be disclosed, and we'll hopefully have some more clarity.
Well, on behalf of all of our listeners, I do hope you will come back on the podcast once the rulemaking process gets underway.
Absolutely. I look forward to it.
Okay, well, that's all for today's episode. Bridget, I know your schedule is bananas. Thank you so much for taking time to join me today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, folks, links to the materials discussed in today's show, including the executive order, are available in the episode notes, as well as Bridget's contact information. Please do not hesitate to reach out to her if you have questions or concerns about climate-related disclosure requirements. I am Megan Burge. Thank you for spending time with me.
Thank you for listening to this BakerBots podcast. For more information on BakerBots practices, please visit us at bakerbots.com. For over 180 years, through 13 offices in 9 countries, BakerBots has the experience, knowledge, and people to solve our clients' most significant legal issues. This presentation is provided by BakerBots LLP for educational and informational purposes only. It is not legal advice. Under the rules of certain jurisdictions, this communication may constitute attorney advertising.